Right, go for it.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. I hope you guys have all had a nice long break from Energy Code Board meetings, but we're excited to get back at it for the next 3 weeks. So looking forward to a lot of really great discussion today with you guys. So we'll just go ahead and get started. The objectives for the meeting today are twofold. The first, we had a couple of discussion topics submitted by board members that, well, are more broad than just a specific proposal. So we're going to spend the first part of today going through those discussion topics. We'll give about 20 minutes for each of those. And then with the second half of our meeting today, we're going to dive right into the board proposals you all submitted for the low energy and carbon code draft number 1. So that shakes out in our agenda. Pretty much just like I said, we'll do some general and residential specific board discussion topics. That'll take us to about 10:25 today. Since this is a 3-hour meeting, we'll give everyone about a 5-minute break in the middle to go stretch your legs, get some water, use the restroom if you have to. And then in the second part of the meeting, we'll dive into the proposals for the low energy and carbon code draft 1. So the proposals we're going to focus on today are the appendices proposals, the definition proposals, and the commercial proposals. And we will hope to get as far as we can on all of those. And then we'll wrap up and send you guys on your way at noon. And just wanted to give a quick update and reminder to the board and to the folks from the public that are listening in. During the open public comment period, we had created and launched a separate form to give specific comments on the low energy and carbon code draft number 1. That form is now closed, but we still have the public comment and code proposal forms that are live on CEO's website from the sort of first several months of this process. So just to note to everybody that those comment forms are still live. Comments and board proposals can still be submitted through those forms. And for board members, we will be checking those before each of our meetings and making sure you all have the most up-to-date comments to review. We did not receive any new ones between when we closed the low energy carbon code form and this meeting. So that's why you did not receive any via email from me, but we'll keep an eye out for those as they continue to come in. All right, and with that, we'd love to get to approving the meeting minutes from meeting 23. Do I have a motion from a board member to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting?
So moved. This is Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Tim. Okay, all those board members in favor of approving meeting minutes from meeting 23, please say aye.
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 Wow, you guys said aye all at the same time. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. And any opposed to approving the meeting minutes from meeting 23, please say nay. Okay, wonderful. So we will approve meeting minutes from meeting 23, and those will be up on CEO's website shortly. Alrighty, so now we're going to jump into the meat and potatoes of today's meeting. So we have 4 discussion topics that we're going to cover today. I wanted to let you all know. So if you, which I hope you all did, took a look through the discussion topics document and the proposals document, you'll notice there were actually 6 discussion topics that were submitted. Adam and I connected with Kim, do I see Kim on the call yet today? Kim Wheels to connect on 2 of the board discussion topics where she had submitted code language. And we decided we're going to move those into the proposal discussion sections of our next 3 meetings rather than as a general discussion topic for today. So we're going to focus on the first 4 that we had, 2 from Jess, 2 from Kim. And we're going to aim to keep the discussion limited to about 20 minutes each. So for the board members who wanted to discuss these topics, please make sure I will be keeping time, but please also make sure we're asking the right questions to get the input you need within that 20-minute time zone or time slot. So with that, without further ado, Jess, you are up first for us today, so I will pass it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So pretty straightforward here, and I am not a building official, so not a compliance expert, but this concern was raised by Ryan from ResNet during our public comment session, and he was concerned about the lines that were added into, I know it was R405, that's what I was paying closest attention to. I'm not sure on the commercial side, but for R405, which is the simulated building performance pathway, there were some things that the code board added to include in the standard reference design, and Ryan's concern was that those additions would complicate using ResNet or ResCheck and ComCheck for code compliance, which raised a red flag for me. And so I just wanted to ask the question. I don't know if it in fact makes ResCheck and ComCheck incompatible. And so I offer that up as a question.
Thanks, Jess. And Elizabeth, I'll just pass it right over to you.
Sure. Yeah, Jess, I do remember that comment. And I think there's overlapping standards here about what systems or software folks would use for documenting compliance under the different methodologies. ResCheck would be used for prescriptive compliance. So that would be like R401 through 404 plus 408. So that's ResCheck. Yes, we would have changes there that would need to be coordinated because we're changing some of the prescriptive requirements around that. R406 is our ERI pathway. That's the one that would use the ResNet standard. There are no changes that we've made to the ResNet modeling standard other than the target that we are going for. So the score, and sorry, that's not my world. I know just enough to be dangerous. R405 is a whole building compliance. So you would not use ResNet software because you have to account for the common areas. It's always been like that. That's not something that we have changed. R405 has always been more using whole building modeling software. So that would be something like, eQuest, Energy Plus, anything that it can account for both residential and commercial systems. That is the same as it has always been. The one amendment that we made to the code is that the 2024 version of R405 had excluded commercial spaces, and the board elected to roll all of the non-residential spaces in so that it aligned more with the current versions, or I should say the 2021 versions, and essentially all historic versions of R405. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Kristen?
Thank you. I had a similar question, so I really appreciate this topic being brought up. So after that wonderful overview of where we may or may not run into issues with modeling or compliance check software, I'm curious what your opinion is as to whether this is something that the board should seriously consider modifying things to make it easier for officials who are charged with enforcing this code.
And Kristen, was that question directed at Jess?
And
or?
I put that out there to the board in general, but specifically to our board representatives who are experts in compliance and in modeling.
I think, and sorry to butt in, from a jurisdictional standpoint, the only impact there would be for our changes to ResCheck. Everything else is basically on the consultant side.
Can I jump in, Kim?
Anna, yeah.
So in my experience with ResCheck and ComCheck, we have added amendments to section R408, and we have added lines to completely really reworked section C406. The 2024 IECC ComCheck that is released at the national level will not be able to be used to comply with this code. We do very often see NREL put together alternative codes within the ComCheck and ResCheck software to allow for jurisdictional amendments and make the software work for those jurisdictions. That takes time. So for example, in Denver, with the 2022 Denver Energy Code, it took about, I want to say it was about a year, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong, to get ComCheck available for the 2022 Denver Energy Code. I know that when we started talking about Section C406 and reworking it, someone brought up this same concern that ComCheck would no longer work. And Adam had stated that the state would be comfortable putting together resources and spreadsheets like the city of Denver did while we were waiting for ComCheck and ResCheck to be able to be used for their codes. So I know that there are resources that the state, I guess, I don't know if they're officially committed to putting those together or not. Kim, if you can remember, or if Adam's here, he could chime in, but I do know that that they were talking about putting resources together so that jurisdictions would be able to enforce this code and know what they're looking for and where to look.
Yeah, thanks.
Adam. Yeah,
Thanks, Anna. And I will just jump in and say that our goal is to work with PNNL and NREL to create customized ResCheck and ComCheck for this code. And recognizing that by the time this code is published, we do still have 9 months-ish until jurisdictions are even required to adopt it. So we do have lead time to get those ResCheck and ComCheck updates potentially made. I think everyone is probably familiar with what's going on in the federal government right now, so we're not sure if any of that would contribute to delays in that process either, but that is our goal, to get those customized softwares from the national labs, and then also to work on creating any additional resources that may be needed to support projects and jurisdictions with compliance. So that is something we are definitely going to be looking at very closely once we kind of have a more finalized code. We can't really start that process until we know what is actually in this code, but that is certainly our goal, to get those done as much as possible. I think in some of the modeling softwares that are used and any potential input or modeling challenges that may be present to changes in R405 and C407, I think we would have to explore what that might look like in terms of any issues there, because I think that was also raised as some of those modeling softwares for the standard reference design account for things that are not necessarily perfectly in alignment with all the changes we've made. And so that would be another factor that the board needs to take into account. But on the ResCheck, ComCheck, and other resources side, do know that the Energy Office is invested in getting customized resources available to support this code.
Thanks, Adam. Brad, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, Anna was correct, and Adam, both Anna and Adam kind of address some of the stuff that I wanted to comment on, but I do want to make one other point of correction. I think Elizabeth had mentioned that R405 was not ResNet. R405 is ResNet. That is the third-party energy consultant, and that is something that would be driven through ResNet and by those consultants performing a PERS rating. So very similar to the R406 path, which is ERI. It's same modeling software is going to be doing both R405 and R406. Different outcomes, but same modeling software, same consulting. And I think if we're going to explore the comment from Ryan, I think we might need a little more information. And I think it was specifically addressed at R405. So I think it might be worth spending a little bit more time understanding what we're missing there.
Thanks, Brad. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. From a jurisdictional standpoint, I would suggest that relying on the federal government to do any updating of anything that does with energy codes may be not the best idea to rely on. And if the CEO is able to do that on their own, I think it's really important that if this code goes forward as written, in particular, the question that's been brought up before and today on the ResCheck and ComCheck, for prescriptive would not be it'd be a disservice to all the jurisdictions throughout. And I point out just one item is Broomfield. I've been given direction by my city council to adopt this code as soon thereafter that it's published, which is going to be September 1st. And I will be taking it to my council possibly later this year, but at the latest early next year. And so if this isn't all resolved, at least Broomfield won't be able to enforce it adequately. I know there are probably some of my other colleagues that are, on the energy code bandwagon, so to speak, that will be wanting to get this code adopted as quickly as possible and not wait for the actual requirements in the state legislation. So I really am hesitant, because if this stays this way and I have to adopt it, I'm not even sure how I'd enforce it, because we get quite a few projects, not a majority, I should say, a minority of projects that go the prescriptive path, both on residential and commercial. So I'd like to keep that in mind, because the question I think came up from Jess was from an enforceability standpoint. So at least that's my position for my jurisdiction, but I'm suspecting I could talk about for other colleagues who may be wanting to go forward quickly, which is a good thing. I mean, that's the whole idea, is to get this thing adopted. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Elizabeth, and then we'll go to Will.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going back to Brad's point about the ERI software being able to be used for R405. Yes, thanks for the correction there, Brad. Yes, it was used when it was just dwelling units only, and I've just never used it that way. We've always used that software for R406, and then more of a whole building style software for R405. So yes, it would be correct to say that you would not use an ERI type of software for R405 anymore, but it could still be used for R406. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Will, I'll jump over to you.
Given the concerns that are being raised and Tim's concerns around timing, and I think the legitimate questions about whether the national labs will be able to provide the same level of support they have in the past, I'm curious from a sort of technical standpoint, what it would take to look at sort of the changes that we've made that would be driving the potential changes that are needed to the compliance software, and sort of be able to come back to the board with, these are the ones that would be relatively easy to address. These ones perhaps would require a lot more work to make changes in the software, because I don't have a sense, what exactly sort of which changes we've made are driving those issues, which ones may be important and which ones may be sort of marginal in terms of their energy impacts. And so it's hard to evaluate what changes we might want to make without that type of analysis. Is that something that we would be able to have done and come back to the board?
So Adam, I may ask you to chime in here before we go to Jess and Ron, just on kind of your thinking about what might be feasible in that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily analysis that we need to do. I think we could potentially try to get more information from the commenters who raised these concerns about where they see the biggest potential conflicts or issues with misalignment between the changes we've made and the softwares that are being used. I think we could certainly do a dive with some of those folks and try to get more information there.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So maybe that's a follow-up piece for the board, is reaching back out to Ryan. I just want to name that we have about 5 minutes left and 5 hands up. So we'll go through the rest of these comments, and then just please keep them short so your other board members have time to speak. So Jess and then Ron.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I can be brief. I'll try to be brief, but I think this conversation dovetails with the second discussion point that I brought up today, because at least from the residential side, there were 3 specific things that we added to the standard reference design that we'll be talking about, because it was the second thing. And I think those were the things that Ryan had mentioned, and then it was also brought up by the Responsible Energy Code Alliance folks as well. So I think that conversation is germane to this as well.
Okay, thanks, Jess. Ron.
Yeah, Boulder County had looked into this topic many years ago when we first started modifying our codes. And when we spoke to the folks at the labs, it was clear that for a jurisdiction of our size, it really would make sense. But since we're talking about a statewide code, it probably does. And I think maybe the thing to do would be to reach out to someone like Rob Sausalito at Pacific Northwest National Labs and just get a little bit of a pulse on how big these changes actually are. And under normal circumstances, I would say this is probably not a big deal for them to make the change. But given what's going on at the federal level, maybe it can happen, but maybe there's some other workaround. Like maybe there's an adjustment factor or a multiplier or some other way that we can use the software as published, and then have a tool that helps us interpret those results to Colorado. To maybe it's not just a black and white, but maybe there's an intermediary step where we can understand how these changes affect stuff. I'm not sure, but I think I would want to understand from a modeling perspective how big these changes are actually affecting the software.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. That could be another good follow-up item for our team after this call today. Dan?
Thank you. I just wanted to add my voice of concern as well as a jurisdiction, kind of like what Tim was saying. We see probably at least a third to a half of our submittals are using ResCheck or ComCheck. So if those are somehow taken off the board, that would be a significant impact for the Pikes Peak region.
Thank you, Dan. Elizabeth.
Yeah, just a quick comment along those same lines. I don't know if anybody else has to deal with actually documenting things in ResCheck and ComCheck. They are cumbersome, to say the least. I don't think that the design community would be sad to have an alternate tool that is easier to use. It has some significant coordination issues across like between architecture and MEP, and I had a team that literally broke it twice and had to recreate their files. And anyway, it is not the ideal for the community, and an alternative I think would be welcomed. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Final comment. I totally agree with Will's comment that, at least from my perspective, and I think would be for the board, is to have a specific list. And I know, Kim, you kind of punted over to the commenters, but I think in order, before we start to go to final voting, that we see which ones are impacting that potential on the ResCheck and ComCheck. And then like Ron's comment, I agree with that, is to reach out, find out with that list. You got to have the list first. Big deal or no big deal? Because if this thing goes forward without having all of that, I think it's really going to be a disservice. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And not meaning to punt, more meaning to say that Adam and I will connect after this meeting and make sure that we're able to follow up on these questions and do what we can to get these answers to you guys as soon as possible. So awesome. Jess, any final thoughts or comments before we move on to the next discussion topic?
No, thank you all for your input. I agree with the direction. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. And you are also up next. So I'll just keep it going.
Here we are. Okay, so I do think this is related. This is a comment that I just mentioned from the Responsible Energy Code Alliance. I have no idea who they are, but I thought it was a valid concern that they raised. So also, this is particular to R405. We had added lines into the standard reference design table, adding renewable energy lighting and non-HVAC and water heating appliances. And the comment was they were worried that this opened up a loophole because it would allow folks to decrease energy efficiency. And basically in the standard reference design, take credit for renewable energy efficient lighting and efficient appliances at the expense of envelope efficiency and other energy conservation measures. And so I just wanted to flag that and see if that was, consistent with the direction we wanted to be heading, or if we were unintentionally allowing some efficiency trade-offs. So I welcome everyone's input.
Thank you, Jess. And Kevin, we'll start it off with you.
Yeah, I thought this was a really well-reasoned kind of oversight that we had from 6. And I feel like it came up somewhere else as well. So I think we unintentionally incentivized the ability to do a lesser thermal envelope. So this is a good change. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Kevin, by good change, are you proposing to remove them again? Is that what you mean by the change?
They had, there was an alternate way in here to say I think it was trying to remove them. Yeah. Carolyn.
Yeah, just clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah. Taking those, as we said, eliminating the new rows in table R405.4.2.1 for renewable energy lighting and appliances.
Yeah, I'll just connect the dots for everybody. So there were a couple board members who did propose changes to the standard reference design table when they submitted their proposals, and then this discussion topic was submitted separately. So I do think the conversation today will lend itself to that discussion when we get there for those proposals. So just making sure those dots are connected.
Yeah, thanks. And that's all I was just trying to clarify, is that Kevin was pointing to those. So thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. We'll go to Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd be in support of removing, I think in the description, she made some really good points, especially the list of bullet points. I don't know what page, but talking about the on-site distinction between on-site or off-site renewable, whether it needs to be used on-site, things about the modeling, which appliances, a number of those things are just not resolved yet, or enough clarification. So unless we go down the path to clarify those, I think at this point it's a lot easier just to remove them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Kim, I'll go to you.
Yeah, this discussion topic relates to the one below that I had proposed as well and I don't know which, what might be the best solution, whether it's to remove them altogether or whether it's to replace it with Energy Star values. I think I was referring to yeah, it was the same part in the table. I'm sorry. I've had a bit of a morning already. I'm trying to catch up. But yeah, just adding that in there of, I don't know what the best solution might be, whether it's to remove them or whether it's for Energy Star criteria. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. And if any board member wants me to pull up the document with all those discussion topics, if you don't have it in front of you, I'm happy to do that and share. Elizabeth, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, sure. Since a lot of the work that we did with R405 was attempting to align it with R408. So I just want to remind the board that the things that we've discussed about rewarding appliance efficiency, lighting efficiency, that exists in the prescriptive path. Also, just want to remind everybody, I actually think R405 is the most stringent, the most difficult to comply with. One of the mandatory requirements of R405, for those who are worried, like, would this allow a deficient envelope? It's the opposite. Your envelope in R405 has to be 15% better than the standard reference design or the baseline. So there are no get out of jail free cards in R405. I still think it'll be the more difficult pathway to comply with. We did a lot of work to try to get things to align across R405 and R408. I do have one amendment proposal to align the line item with solar to make sure that that aligns with our 408 because we had not put in a maximum amount. So now that will also, if you like that proposal, that would also then bring it back to our 408. So everything there is matching. That's where those changes come from. So if I lose that argument and we take it out of our 405, just want to remind everybody it's still in our 408. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Brad?
Thanks. Yeah, I also just want to support removal of these line items from the table for standard reference design, and then remind folks that historically, within our 405, renewable energy has never been allowed as a demonstration of compliance. So support removing them. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. And Kristen, you had a hand up. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer some perspective, having been in charge of Energy Star appliances and, also working in the solar field in Colorado and energy efficiency over the last decade or so. I think that the comments are fair in noting that Energy Star often becomes the market standard. That is in part how market transformation programs are designed to work. Were it not for the Energy Star, we likely would see a lot of appliances and other products not meeting those levels that they do today. Whether or not the fact that it's standard means that it's not fair or that it's not efficient, I think is a matter of opinion and perspective. I personally would advocate for continuing to provide credit for Energy Star appliances, even though in some cases they do represent a large portion of the market already. And then when it comes to envelope, I actually do agree with Liz's comments, Elizabeth Gilmore's comments. I do think that we are doing a fairly robust job in assuring that we put energy efficiency first and don't just allow for solar energy to circumvent efficiency requirements. That being said, should the majority of the board wish to remove some of these standard features, I would not oppose that and can definitely see the logic and understand where the commenters are coming from. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. I'll go Carolyn and then Kevin.
Yeah, and I'm just going to express my support for what Kristen was just sharing as well. I do think to the extent that it allows for us to still have an enforceable code in the time frame we need, all the earlier discussion, I'd like to keep the at least the appliances. I support removing the solar though.
Thanks, Carolyn. Kevin?
Thanks for bringing that up, Elizabeth and Kristen. A follow-up question for Kristen about that. For the on-site production, I think one of the comments or the community comments or board, I can't remember which one it was in, but they had a component where there was a scenario where, hey, they didn't specify that the on-site power had to be used for that. Like the on-site power could be used and then just sold out to the grid. Would you, if you were to keep all of that, would you suggest some kind of language tweak that would say that on-site power has to be used on site to the extent that it could be before it was like net metered back?
I would. I also, recognize that in Colorado we have a variety of climate zones, and so you might see some jurisdictions where, despite best efforts to use power on site, you're going to be overproducing in the summer and underproducing in the winter, and that's kind of just a function of where you put your solar and where you build your house. So I'd want to think about that a little bit. But, again, I am not averse to attenuating or adjusting some of those solar credits should the rest of the board wish to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little confused. So I think part of the discussion flowed into maybe that Kim's second comment on requiring Energy Star rated appliances. So are we talking about that one also now?
Tim, so it's a good question. These three discussion topics do have quite a bit of overlap, as Kim named. I think she was also trying to figure out the alignment overlap with the 405, 408, which is what Jess also raised. So
can I just make a comment on Energy Star? Because I do have a comment about that particular, adding that as a requirement. So
I think that sounds good, Kim. If you don't mind, I think these discussion topics are close enough. We could talk about them together. So yeah.
Yep, thanks. But even generally energy efficient appliances, but then if changing it to a more specific Energy Star, there are quite often I see on both production builders and custom, or more so on custom builders, that all the listed appliances are not installed at the time of our CO, for a variety of reasons. Maybe, they don't pick the option to, have everything like a washer, dryer, et cetera. Or they're bringing their own appliances from another house that they're selling and bringing it in. So I would be, from an enforceability standpoint, I guess if someone tried to do that and take that one credit, then they'd have to install every listed appliance. So that's my concern from an enforceability standpoint, putting that in there. I know it's only 1 point, but still 1 point's 1 point. It might be the one you use to get over the finish line, so to speak. So that's my comment from enforceability. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Carolyn?
Yeah, so for clarification, we're not requiring higher efficiency appliances. We're allowing a credit for higher efficiency appliances. And then the question is, to get credit for the higher efficient appliance, do they have to be Energy Star certified? Is that the proposal?
Kim, I may ask you to jump in here and make sure that Carolyn's interpretation of this discussion topic is what you were asking.
That's my understanding of the public comment suggestion, just kind of what flagged it for me to bring forward. So that's partly why I wanted to bring it forth as a discussion topic versus a proposal, because I wanted to make sure that I was understanding the public comment correctly and, just have board consensus of the direction that we wanted to go. So I think this short answer is yes.
Yeah, so I would just generally say, I think under the presumption it is an optional credit, I would support requiring the Energy Star certification. And then to Tim's point, I think we probably need to be specific about the minimum number of appliances that have to be included at time of construction to take credit for this. As he points out, not all are considered permanent fixtures, and so I think our focus is on specific appliances included at construction, and so just flagging that we probably just need to set some minimum threshold of what qualifies.
So I just want to point out that is already in our 408. That exists.
I was going to say the same thing. It does say that it has to be installed.
So can I add a little bit more clarification around this? So in section R405, in the proposed model, it says, non-HVAC and water heating appliances as proposed shall meet or exceed minimum efficiencies from table R408.2.6. And within section R408.2.6 is the table that specifies which appliances specifically are required to show the efficiency improvement, and it's refrigerators, dishwashers, clothes washers, and clothes dryers.
And of those, my personal opinion is you're going to see the largest savings from the clothes washers and dryers. The incremental savings for dishwashers are negligible these days, and for refrigerators, it's much more tied to the size necessarily than the rating.
Carolyn, did you want to wrap up your comment before I move on to Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding the concern here, and then I don't know that I've seen anything constructed that includes the washer and dryer. And so it feels like this point is probably never going to be used.
Well, you could ask for the purchase sheet or spec sheet at least.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Elizabeth, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry. It only made me think of if if we keep this, if you want to allow partial credit, like we see the first three: refrigerators, dishwashers, clothes washers a lot. Energy Star clothes dryers are really expensive, so that's a harder one to target and to swallow these days. Thanks.
Probably the greatest savings potential in our climate, though. But I agree, they are much more expensive.
So I think the mechanism there is that the getting credit for it then helps encourage that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I do want to just jump us back quickly to Jess's comment and discussion topic. And I think we've kind of bounced between it. All of these topics were related, but Jess, just to confirm, do you have any other questions for the board before we move along? Any final pieces that you didn't get input on that you were hoping for?
No, thank you. This was really helpful to hear everyone chime in. And since there are some proposals about this, I'll look forward to further conversation. I did just want to flag something that Sarah from, I don't know if their acronym is RECA or RECA, but the same commenters put in the chat that R405.2 or section 22 allows reductions in the thermal envelope efficiency 15% below the prescriptive baseline. So there are some trade-offs in there, but I know we're going to come back to this in proposals, so it's an ongoing conversation. And like I said, I do appreciate everyone weighing in because it was really helpful for me.
Just to chime in on that, the reduction there is for U values, which means lower is better. So it's a reduction of U values means an increase in R values.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, Kim.
I just am curious, and maybe this might be for the code professionals, of if we change R405 and then the comment that I made around R408.2.6, would we change them consistently both in order to have the code make sense and be in alignment with itself? Just for a point of clarification.
Kim, I will just say that as it's written now in the draft is that the R405 line in the table refers to the R408.2.6 table. And so if we were to make changes, as it's written now, if we were to make changes to R408.2.6 to align with Energy Star or whatever the proposal ends up being, then it would be reflected in the R405 table line if that is to be retained as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Helpful.
Okay. Kim, given the discussion that the board had on this topic so far, do you have any other questions, or I guess I'll just turn it over to you to see if there's anything else you were hoping to get out from the board on this discussion topic 3.
No, I feel like it was pretty clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So in that case, Kim, I will continue to have this ball in your court, and we can talk about your 4th discussion topic here.
Okay, great, thanks. So this was brought up by several of the public commenters related to where homes get built extra large. So they fall quite far beyond our size criteria for what we're calling large homes. And it was the suggestion to incorporate utilizing the appendices of RG and or RC to kind of move those extra large homes toward a net zero type of requirement. I'll speak for my jurisdictions where we have large homes that since 2009 or 10, these jurisdictions have had in place a scaled requirement such that at 3,500 or so is where they have to reach a HERS score of somewhere around 60 or the ERI of 61. And then as the homes get larger, they have to get an improved HERS score. And so we haven't gone in this area yet toward a net zero at a certain size. But I think that's what's being proposed. I think it really would be in alignment with what the code intent is. And as we've seen from multiple studies, that as homes get larger and then they're in this extra large criteria or extra large size category, they just use significantly more energy use per square foot. So I wanted to bring this up and see what the board thought, and how might be the best way to do that.
Thanks, Kim. Tim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. I would suggest or argue, however you want to put that, based on the state legislation, that the board is not able to make the code or an appendix more restrictive. I know the way we've been doing that in a way is taking an appendix, stretch code, and bringing it into the body of the code, which was determined to be a legal way to do that. But making what you're proposing would increase the number of homes that would need to be meeting certain increased efficiency. So that would be my argument.
Thanks, Tim. Adam, do you want to speak to that? I guess on just like the feasibility of this as an option before we continue.
Sure, yeah. So I think that this would be viable within the bounds of the statute, because Appendix RC or RG, if the board were to just adopt them completely, they would apply to all buildings of any size. And so I think what Kim here is wanting to discuss is the possibility of applying these appendices, but only to the extremely large homes. And so it wouldn't necessarily be a weakening of the appendix, but it would be a narrowing of the scope of what that appendix would actually apply to. Because as I said, if you just adopted Appendix RC in its entirety, that would require all homes to be net zero. And I think what Kim is proposing is not all homes be net zero, but only those larger homes potentially be net zero. So just wanted to throw that out there, that seems to be within the scope of what we can do within the appendices.
Thanks, Adam. Will, I'll go over to you.
Yeah, so I'm sympathetic to this proposal. I think it would affect a relatively small number of homes, but homes that use a very large amount of energy and have a disproportionate impact on carbon emissions. And as I think about kind of our twin charges to maximize carbon reductions while making sure that we maintain housing affordability, I think that direction on maintaining housing affordability is very much focused on the lower cost homes, and that I don't see significant affordability concerns around the very large homes. And so I do think that this approach would be very much in keeping with our legislation.
Thanks, Will. John, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I'll just keep this short. I would support this as well. We see that the homes that are over 4,000 square feet are just using significantly more energy, even on a square foot basis, than other homes, is what we're measuring. And the only thing I would suggest is that there's an exception for homes in areas where the utility may not allow them to put solar on the roof, or severely limit how much solar is allowed. We do deal with that in some of our rural areas. So, I would suggest something like, to the greatest extent possible within the utility restrictions, and at least give the code officials some discretion to be able to waive this or modify this requirement if there's a restriction on solar. So
thanks, John. Kristen, I'll go to you next.
To add color to John's comment, in some rural areas, cooperative utilities are not required to net meter more than 10 kilowatts. However, I will say that you can get a lot out of 10 kilowatts if you put it in the right place on the roof. And then I just wanted to support what John and Will just said. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Jess?
Yeah, similarly, in support. I just wanted to confirm though, I believe we already pulled Appendix RG into the code, right, for everything over our 3,500 square feet above grade plane. So if we're looking at an extra large threshold, I'm wondering if that would be an RC rather than an RG.
Thanks, Jeff. Or Jess. Jeff. We don't have a Jeff on this board. Kim, did you want to comment to that at all? The Appendix RG or RC? What you were thinking?
I think we just have to look at, what's in there, whether it would be amending RG further with what we've already incorporated, or whether it's better to just bring in Appendix RC. I didn't have I hadn't explored either option further than just trying to interpret the public comment.
Oh, thanks, Kim. Tim and then Carolyn.
Yeah, thanks. Adam clarified, I think that if this was done, it'd have to be done through RC. Because if it was RG, I'll go back to my argument that since RG has the 5,000 square foot threshold, which we played around with when we brought those parts in, it has to be RC. And then, as Adam also pointed out, I just reread RC, and there is no size threshold at all. So if it was adopted as is, would apply to any size residential. And in this case, in the proposal, which I am now in agreement that, if we brought RC in and put the threshold at 7,000 square foot or greater, and, either here or there on the conditioned living area, which, would be including like a basement. So I'd be in support of that part on RC. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Carolyn?
I just want to note too, really quick, just for everyone's awareness, that RG is the levels at which the current larger tier in the code right now is set at. So if you're going to create a larger tier than that, it makes no sense to set them at the same level as you have set what would be the new medium tier, right? So I think that just keeping that in mind as you're considering what additional requirements would apply to those larger homes, that we are already using kind of Appendix RG, as Tim noted, at that what is currently the large tier of the homes right now. So just wanted folks to keep that in mind.
Thanks, Adam. Carolyn?
Yeah, thanks. And I was just going to echo in on the, I think it's RC. That's certainly what I would support. And I think I have a proposal in there to go back to conditioned living space broadly. And so I think the conditioned living space is the appropriate metric here.
Thanks, Carolyn. And just to connect the dots again between this discussion and some board proposals, we had 4 board proposals to adjust the home size threshold. So hopefully you all have seen those and considering those as we're thinking about this additional size threshold. Elizabeth.
Yeah, my only question for folks who work in this arena is if we can do just a sort of a generic sizing exercise to see if we do require this to be on-site solar, how much physical space that array would take up, and ensure that it really could be implemented in a standard home of this size, to make sure that we're not writing unenforceable code. Thank you.
For what it's worth, Elizabeth, this is a typical new home size in Boulder, and we've been net zero on these since 2017.
That's helpful. Thanks,
and we've
Carolyn.
had very few exceptions that had to go to an offsite solution. So
that's helpful. Thanks, Carolyn. If you think that there might be an exception needed for something like that, and I'm thinking of homes that like maybe have a green roof or utilizing their roof area otherwise. if you think there should be an exception there, some way to utilize offsite or something, I don't know. Just want to make sure we're considering those scenarios.
Yeah, I think that there's to the earlier discussion about ensuring there's language in there that supports the code official making an appropriate adjustment based on, you know, factors such as lot orientation or excessive shading
Yeah,
or
good
the
point.
interconnection. I think that we went through this in ours around, you must first maximize all available roof space, and then the code official can adjust the performance requirement appropriately if you can't accommodate it. Just because we were trying not to drive people to offsite solutions to meet the code. But yeah, again, practically speaking, we've been like the new homes that have been built under Boulder's code since 2017 have been larger than this in the shaded foothills, and we've been able to largely see it met. So
that's really helpful. Thank you.
Can I just clarify before Ron goes, Carolyn, is the Boulder code, is the size criteria at 7,000 or is it different?
We've been requiring net zero of homes over 5,000 square feet of conditioned space since 2020. So I think we started larger in 2017, and then in 2020 it was 5,000 square feet conditioned living area, so smaller than this requirement.
Okay.
But most of the homes built were far larger than that 5,000 square feet, just from a practical standpoint.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, Ron.
So Boulder County's been having essentially net zero for 5,000 square feet and above since 2016. And the only places where we've really seen struggles that weren't driven by poor architecture were people who are on the north side of steep sloped canyons where they really didn't have any direct sun exposure for large portions of the year. And we have been allowing offsite solar for them to accommodate those situations.
Thanks, Ron. Jim.
I'll start with a question, just to clarify that this would, I know it's in the residential side, the residential portion section of the IECC applies also to 3 stories and less R2s. So this would also apply for that. And then once I get that answer, I'll ask another question or a point. Sorry. That's the way I read the code. I just want to make sure.
Tim, that's right. So it's referred to in the code in the language for those larger homes as dwelling units. So it would apply whether it's a single family or a dwelling unit in a multifamily that's over that size, which I'm guessing you don't see a ton of multifamily that are going to be 5,000 square feet. There might be a handful every now and again, but it's probably very rare. So.
Okay, thank you. That's just for the board's sake. It's confusion with the IECC sometimes on how that's applied. So the reason I brought that up is there is a significant push from our state legislators, politicians, to increase attainable housing and in various capacities of allowing or require. In one case, we've got a piece of state legislation that's being looked at to allow up to a 5-story apartment building with a single stair. It's pretty controversial with certain limitations, but that'll clearly be a small footprint by the state legislation. And, you know, with 4 or 5 stories, you're going to hit that square footage possibly. But with that being said, I think we've got to be able to keep in mind as a board and from an enforceability, you know, when we hear about Boulder County and some of these other places, I mean, those are single family projects that are on, you know, half-acre, full-acre lots. Typically not a big deal to get your on-site renewable. But I think the point was brought up earlier in terms of having to have some kind of an exception or clarification that you're not going to have a big enough roof area in an infill lot, you know, and lots are getting smaller because the developers want to make the footprint lot is small and then build up because the land is so it's we got to really keep that in mind with the urban areas as this thing moves forward and the way the state legislation is starting to push attainable housing, and so we've got to go hand in hand with that. Thanks.
And Tim, just as a clarifying question, when you were describing like that 4 or 5 story building, that's not a single family home that we're talking about in those contexts though, right? Or were you saying that that is a single family home still?
That was good. Yeah, that was going to be my point as well. Is that I think those single stair instances would probably fall under the commercial code and not subject to this. So I had the same question for you, Tim. Thanks.
And even if they are under the residential code, if they're multifamily, that square footage requirement applies to each dwelling unit within the building, not to the building as a whole. So we're not
you might
talking
have a 10,000 square foot thing of 12 apartments or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And so that wouldn't apply. That would fall in the smaller category. So
Tim, you're still muted.
So this would specifically, this would just apply to a single family.
It would also technically apply to multifamily if each individual dwelling unit in the multifamily building were that large. But like I said, I don't think you're going to see very many instances where you have a multifamily building that has 10 units in it that are each 3,500 square feet or larger. I mean, I think that's
never
just going to happen. So
yeah.
Largely speaking,
I do have one.
You have one?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's going to be very rare. I shouldn't say it will never happen.
I agree. I guess that clears up my confusion that the 7,000 square foot would be somewhere written that it's just for the single single living unit or whatever.
Yeah,
so
the code uses the term dwelling unit, which is going to apply, and we would continue to use that terminology.
Thank you. Perfect.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Tim. I also just want to note there's a couple, just if you guys are not, just continue to keep your eye on the Q&A. We've got some participants dropping notes and helpful comments in there. So, okay. I don't see any other hands. Kim, do you feel like you've got what you need from this discussion?
I think the one just remaining question is RG is where we're addressing large homes at whatever size category we end up on after that next discussion. If we use 7,000 at net zero, would the board want to see something in between? So that then there's a scale, or is it just if you're smaller than this, then you can go with prescriptive. If you're at the 5, whatever size, then you are under RG. And then if you're over 7,000, then you fit into RC.
I think that's what we have.
I mean, is that what the board would want to see versus another size in between? I think I'm answering my own question of not making it more complicated.
So I think the question too, Kim, would be if there is another size in between, what do you use to create that? Like what requirements do you use? Because RC is as you said, an ERI only path. And we already have all of the prescriptive performance and ERI path for RG accommodated in that 3,500 square feet above grade plane and larger category currently. So with that question, I guess where does the requirements come from? Where do they come from for an even more interim tier?
Yeah, I think it feels like for this situation for statewide code that would complicate things. And that, yeah, I think just sticking with this is what where my proposal is, unless somebody else has a different input.
Thanks, Kim. If board members want to raise their hands and address that, feel free. But I'll go Carolyn and then I'll go Tim.
Yeah, I'll comment on that and then also comments in the chat. So I think my position has been that our base code needs to address the majority of the structures built. So thinking of a bell curve, you need to be so many standard deviations from the average before you start to trigger additional requirements. So our base code should be sufficiently stringent to cover everything, and then we deal with the fringes. And I think that's what we've tried to do. And then so I think we're good with the RG for, you know, your large homes that are, you know, kind of that first standard, you know, first tranche on the fringes, and then really large homes, which I agree have characteristics that are excessively different than your average home. So I think we're in good shape with the 3 tranches that we propose. To the comment in the Q&A from Johnny, I just want to name that we've struggled with this repeatedly of when people say like the average homes are 4,000 or 7,000 or 6,000, the data mixes above plane and total condition square footage. And so I'd be cautious with those numbers. I do think that dealing with conditioned living area is putting us in the right place. And I think 7,000 conditioned living area is solidly in the very large home size. So I feel really good about that number. Because again, that's like, you know, maybe a 4,000 square foot above plane home with 2,000 square feet of below grade conditioned living space. Like, I think you can very easily visualize those as the very large, no matter which plane the square footage is on.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Tim, did you have anything to add? You dropped your hand.
No, I actually looked at the code and answered my question, the clarification between the appendix kicking you back to R406, the ERI path, and that's what Adam pointed out, that specifically has the ERI path dwelling unit. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, that was right almost exactly at our 20-minute mark. So great work, everybody. Before we move on to a quick break in our board proposals, I just wanted to throw this back to Elizabeth really quick. Elizabeth, you added a comment after we had moved on from the R405 discussion, and I think it would just be helpful to share that with the board. If anyone else is like me, reading those comments can be very hard to interpret. So if you want to share that, and then if any board members have follow-up questions, we can dwell on that for a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Yeah, apologies, I totally misspoke about the envelope backstop in R405, so I wanted to correct my misstatement. Sorry about that. There is the section in there would allow envelope deficiencies relative to the reference baseline, that's part of the standard R405 that was unamended by the board. So apologies, little dyslexia. I read the I read the less than sign the wrong way. So just wanted to offer that correction. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any board members have follow-up questions or want to make sure they better understand that before we move on? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So we are, by some measure of miracle, slightly ahead of schedule, which is great. Hopefully that gives us time to actually get through our full agenda today. So it is 10:10 right now. We're going to do a 5-minute break. I'll ask you guys to come back at 10:15 and we'll continue on. Okay, everyone. If you can hear my voice, please make your way back to your computers. And we can go ahead once I see most faces, or if don't want to turn your camera on, you can throw me a thumbs up. Make sure we've got everyone back in place before we keep going. All right. Seeing a lot of folks come back, seeing our Lotus team back. All right, I think we could probably go ahead and get going again. Cool. All right, so just confirming you guys can still see my screen. Okay, so this next section of the meeting, we're going to dive into the specific proposals that were submitted for the low energy and carbon code draft. And we're going to start with the sort of general proposals that were related to the appendices. We'll move to the proposals related to definitions, and then we'll start to dive into the proposals for the commercial code. Now, I know we have a number of new board members who may not have gone through this proposal process with us, so I just wanted to take a moment to explain what we're doing, and then if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and we can talk through it. So roughly, we're aiming for about 10 minutes per proposal. This is really just the time check that I'm holding on to as we move through the meeting to make sure we get through as much as we can. I will say that if board discussion is ongoing and we're really at a place where things are not resolved at the end of the discussion and Q&A section, I typically let those conversations continue. So we add flexibility into this, but this is sort of the general rule of thumb we try to follow to make sure we stay on track and on time. So the first minute of the 10 minutes will be whichever board member proposed the change. We give them the floor, they share their proposal, what they're hoping to do with it. For the next roughly 8 minutes, we allow board question, Q&A, and discussion. We ask that, keep your comments as concise as possible, so as many board members who would like to have a chance to share. And then once we're at the end of that time block, or we see no more hands and discussions or questions from the board, we do a straw poll. So to quickly describe what the straw poll is, the straw poll is our mechanism for our team to understand the general direction of what the board would like to see for these proposals. So of the folks who raise their hand to vote, a 50% majority of board member votes is what wins the straw poll. So we will have for each vote a yes vote. Yes, I accept this proposal. No, I do not accept this proposal, and an abstain vote. All abstain votes are still considered a vote. So all of the votes submitted for all three of those, one of those three options needs to get the 50% majority in order to win. Straw polling is not final voting, and I really want to emphasize that. This is not saying that this is the final language that I agree to in this final code. This is really just indicating preference at this point so we can continue in our process. And then at the very end of our process in May, when we have our final meetings, every proposal to change the code will need a 2/3 vote to approve. So that is the final voting that will dictate the final code. At this point, we're just straw polling. Questions from the board on what we're doing, where we're headed?
The only thing I'm going to add is that for majorities, it's 50% plus one. Don't forget that. So you can't have the for and against be equal and have it win. It has to be more for than against.
Thank you, Adam. Good clarification. Okay, awesome. So if questions come up, please just ask them. But this is where we're going to start today. So as you all saw in the proposal doc, we have two categories of proposals for these general proposal, this general proposal section. So we had 4 board members that all had the same proposal. And then the second proposal submitted by Elizabeth if we talk about that, we'll dictate the straw poll for proposal 1 will dictate if we need to talk about proposal 2. So for proposal 1, I'm going to give each board member who proposed this a moment to share their why, and then we'll jump into board discussion.
Sorry, Kim, before we vote on number 1, would it be possible if I can review proposal 2 just so folks know what the alternate is and then go back and vote?
Yeah, I don't see any issue with that. Yeah, Elizabeth, that'd be great. So we'll do, we'll present all the proposals and then have the discussion, and then we can do our straw poll from there. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay. Well, Carolyn, I will pass it to you first.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I think I'm in company here in terms of proposing to remove appendices RM and CL and recalling back to our discussion. It was very important to us as a board to remove as to the greatest extent practical the inherent biases in the code. And we put into the base code the energy-based modeling, understanding that energy savings is energy savings. It doesn't change depending on what you assume to be a cost of energy. I think we heard during that original discussion, as well as very clearly in the public comments, including those who oppose the use of the energy metric, that there will be a high probability that if we retain the appendices with the cost methodology, that it will likely be adopted and used and be counter to the overarching goals of the code and to the state mandate under which we're operating. And so I think leaving them there creates too much of a potential default in that regard. And so I agree with the public speakers who advocated for its removal. And I think that one of the reasons we compromised earlier in the process was under a presumption that there may be situations where the energy-based modeling, there might be a building that didn't meet that. I don't think that we've identified such an instance where that could occur, and we still have the alternative means and methods provisions within the code that if somebody simply can't use the tools available in the code, they can work with the jurisdictional official to identify an alternative. And I think that's good. And if there is a jurisdiction that wants to revert to cost, then I think they could still do it even if we don't have that provision there, provided they demonstrate to the state that they've established a more stringent code or at least a commensurate code. So I think I'd just like to have them removed. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Carolyn. Will or Adam, would you like to share your thoughts on this proposal?
I can speak to it. I don't think I have anything else to say. I think Carolyn said it very well. I think we are in our proposal is in alignment and our reasoning is in alignment with what Carolyn said.
Thanks, Adam. All right, and Jess and Kim, you guys were the last two, so if you have anything additional to add, Jess, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Kim. All right, double thumbs up from Jess. Kim? All right, double thumbs up. Amazing. Okay, so that's the rationale for the board members who are proposing to remove these two appendices. And then Elizabeth, I will pass it over to you. So the one proposal on the table is to remove both appendices. The second proposal on the table is just to revise the appendix RM. And so that's Elizabeth's proposal, and I'll turn it over to you now, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I thought the comments on this section were great. I don't disagree with the board proposals here necessarily, but did want to throw out one other option for folks who may prefer to keep options open. I am a fan of options. I thought that the note that the energy metrics is all that Denver has used thus far is an important one. Which means that keeping the cost metric has done no harm to Denver, but it was a way to kind of keep stakeholders happy that they had that option. So even though it hasn't been used, it helped ease some concerns of the community. So again, it has done no harm that it exists. So I think that's important to consider. But I did review both of them, both RM and CL, with a lot of detail to make sure I still felt like they were not going to do any harm, and identified a few things here in Appendix RM. One of the things that I'm proposing to RM, and actually I think I did this for 405 as well, so you'll see a similar theme, is just changing some of the wording from a big messy paragraph to a table, just to make it easier to read. No actual change in formatting there. I also added some wording around the unit size when it applies to multifamily buildings with multiple units, that square footage threshold, which right now is 3,500, is an average when you have a multifamily building, because we do have just a handful that would have some above and some below. Think like Summit County condos. Then the other thing I changed here was that I reverted back to for cost base, it makes more sense for the baseline fuel source to be the same as the proposed fuel source. This actually helps incentivize electric systems a little bit more under this metric, because those cost savings between high efficiency electrification are better than high efficiency gas. And then I think along in here is another proposal, well, adding a definition for mixed fuel, which a lot of people have proposed. So that's not super impactful.
And Elizabeth, here, I was realizing as I probably should have been showing the code language. So here's if you want to talk through it, and I can flip.
Yeah. So this is tablifying the paragraph. I didn't change any of the intent of the paragraph. I just think a table makes it way easier to read. So this, if the board chooses to change that 3,500 square foot metric, obviously that would change here. I added a clarification that this would be average dwelling unit size if this is applying to multifamily buildings, because this is a building compliance methodology. And then the percentages are the same. And then this is what I changed in the baseline to realign the baseline heating, cooling, service water heating fuel sources with the proposed, which again is better for electrification. So my goal here was to try to keep the option open without creating like a loophole for gas systems. I think this will probably rarely be used, because I think it's the more difficult compliance metric relative to the energy compliance metric. But again, I'm a fan of options, even if they are not used, because I think there was also, even though there was a lot of commentary about deleting those, there was also a lot of commentary about preserving these. So I'm hoping that this is a compromise between the both. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I know there's a number of slides here that we've been looking at. So just if you need me to flip between any of the slides as you want to speak to your comment, let me know. I'm happy to navigate. But we'll go into board discussion and Q&A. So Tim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question. Did you review the commercial one in depth, or just primarily look at the
I did. I looked at the commercial one as well. And the alignments I made here with CM are already in the commercial one. So the commercial one has the same thing, where the fuel source of the baseline matches the fuel source of the design, which is what we're currently used to, like in C407 and R405. That's more, status quo.
So your recommendation would be leave CL in as is, and then modify RM as shown?
It is. And I know this is sort of an act of faith that I'm asking for here. I think keeping Appendix CL will do no harm. I think it eases some stakeholder concerns that we keep that option open. And I think we will just, see, drawing on our experience from Denver, I also think it will rarely, if ever, be used.
So clearly, for clarity, I should say, either one of these, commercial or residential, would just be an optional path.
That's correct, right, everyone? Kimberly?
Yeah, I would. So it would not, if a jurisdiction was to adopt the low energy carbon code as a base code, it would not automatically adopt RM, Appendix RM or CL, and a jurisdiction would have to intentionally adopt the Appendix RM and Appendix CL if they wanted energy cost as an allowable metric, and then it would make it so that was I guess maybe the primary metric. So it's, I don't believe, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, it is an option in the base code. A jurisdiction would have to intentionally adopt the appendix to allow it to be an option.
Correct. Yeah, they'd have to intentionally adopt the appendix, and by adopting the appendix, it would only allow it to be an alternative to the site energy approach. It would not allow it. It says specifically in the scope of the appendix that it is not intended to replace site energy, but be added as an optional alternative.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's what I thought it was. I just wanted to make sure the board understood that. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one final thought to this. I do not disagree with the boards who have the board members who have proposed deleting these appendices in any way. I'm and I think it does take a little faith to keep them, but I think it'll also help some stakeholder engagement. And as folks get used to how these work, I think in the next code cycle, everyone will likely realize we don't need them, but that it will, again, kind of ease some concerns about this transition if we were to keep them. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Carolyn?
Yeah, thanks. A few thoughts on this, and realizing I'm advocating for the removal, and I appreciate what you presented here, Elizabeth. I think a few concerns is first, I think the fact that people have or have not leaned into it as an option in Denver is probably not the best benchmark, given we're really looking at a statewide condition, and obviously what's built in Denver is a little bit different, particularly as we lean into the commercial space rather than the residential. So I remain concerned. And then I did hear quite a bit of advocacy for preserving it. Unfortunately, a lot of that advocacy is coming from people who are arguing that, I'll just say in favor of kind of the tried and true methods of basically skipping on investments. So we were hearing a lot from the housing advocate, the housing advocates, not the builder advocates. Thank you. That's the term I'm looking for, about that desire. And that made me actually particularly concerned. And I could see very much an advocacy happening. To your point about it takes a little bit of faith. I could see that advocacy happening in jurisdictions throughout the state, and the default actually going back to the fuel cost. And so that I remain pretty concerned about that. So that's just my position on that.
Thank you, Carolyn. We'll do Andrew, then Jess, and then we'll pop to Tim. Andrew, feel free to unmute and share your thought.
Yeah, I thought I was on mute. I'm sorry. Along that line, that I, as a builder rep, still operate in many states, and many of us make decisions based upon how the current 2024 and the current 2021 code are currently drafted. And if you believe they're inherently biased towards gas, that still puts the builder community at an extreme disadvantage if Colorado has become so inherently different than other states. And the underlying 2024 code is still a step forward that, while I have been somewhat supportive, and some of the building community has been somewhat supportive of having a not cost be the premise that consumption may be a viable path. I think you heard that from ResNet, that was permissible without an extreme undertaking, and may not be inherently an obstacle towards a builder that operates in multiple states. I don't want to remove this appendix, and I'm disagree with that. The cost methodology is inherently biased towards gas, and those persons that said it, I believe they're inherently seeking a goal that may just be inconsistent with how we operate as a building community across the country. And operating in a consistent manner is just inherently essential for affordability, because many of our plans are intentionally designed to be affordable based upon the ability to operate across states, not just within a state. But thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Jess.
My perspective on removing these two appendices is that even if we remove them, there are still options within the code, right? There are still the prescriptive pathway and there's still the performance ERI pathway or the 406. So adding or keeping these appendices in doesn't necessarily limit people's options. They can choose a different compliance option or pathway.
Thank you, Jess. Tim?
Thank you. So we just clarified for the board's sake that these are remaining to be in appendices, which are only need to be adopted by the local jurisdiction. So I would argue that if there are advocates out in the community when, say, I take something to council and they want me, or my jurisdiction, I should say, to adopt a particular appendix, that they can bring their case to us through our public process, however you are set up, make their case, and if we decide that that's a good case, that we would adopt it as per what I feel is the best interest for our jurisdiction and building community and citizens. So there are a lot of appendices in IBC, the IRC, and when we adopt, jurisdictions adopt all over the country, and there's an appendix that they don't like or they don't want to adopt for whatever reason, they don't go through the path and say, we don't like it so bad, we're just going to remove it. We just don't adopt it. So I don't understand why we just don't leave them in there as a potential option. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to now. At first, I thought it was a good idea to remove them, but I don't see any reason why to do that at the state level. It just makes no sense to me to leave that. I do like some of the comments for the changes to RRM, though. I would support those changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, first, as a point of clarification, I think we caused the creation of these as opposed to these being inherently developed, right? We pushed a component out of the base code into these new appendices. And then I think, my answer to you, Tim, is when we think about the breadth of the jurisdictions throughout the state, you can envision the effectiveness of a lobby from those, and not to speak. I don't want this to be a negative reflection on Andrew. I think he's very sound in his argument. But you can imagine that if you have builders coming in and saying, we're not going to build in your community because you're setting the standard higher, like that could carry a lot of weight. And I think if we all agree that there's an inherent bias, which I think we've seen plenty of analysis that proves that out, it's just too much risk that it's just a simple thing. No, you need to adopt this appendices. It's there. The state already endorsed it. And by putting in an appendice, we're effectively endorsing it. And I think that's my issue is we know it's biased. We've got the evidence to say that including it is biased. I think Elizabeth has proposed some ways to try and mitigate that. But as she's, her own words, it still requires some faith. And I don't think that that's an appropriate place for us to be is hoping and leaning into some faith. And I just, again, said it is, there are more than one option here. And so I think we should, again, I'll just stick with my argument. We should just remove them.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, I'm not seeing any other board hands. So if you would like to share a question or a comment, please do so. Otherwise, we'll move to a straw poll. So Tim, I'll take your thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to rebut that last, I guess, statement from Carolyn in that leaving an appendix into a base code, I don't feel that the Energy Board is showing or making a statement that it's supported. There's like 7 appendices on the residential side, a number on the commercial side. on the IBC and IRC, there's probably 10 appendices on either of those codes. And just because it's in the put in the appendix through a very good consensus code change process that's been in effect for many, many years through the ICC, doesn't mean that the Energy Code Board is supporting that. It's there. So I just rebut that. I don't agree with that statement at all. I still feel leaving it in as an appendix has no bearing with what the board's position is to actually remove it completely out of the code.
Yeah, but Tim, I mean, you agree with me. We created RM. That's not an IECC appendice. It's one we generated. And so if we're generating an appendice.
Nope, you are correct. I stand corrected.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so that's what I meant, is it's inherently endorsed by us because we created it.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you both. Ron and then Elizabeth.
I think Caroline Jackson just said what I was going to say.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just want to add, I appreciate everyone's thoughts here. The act of faith that I'm requesting is only because I have a lot of experience documenting performance energy code compliance. So my crystal ball might be a little clearer than everyone else's. So this is maybe perhaps more an act of faith in how I see this working for the community based on having done this literally thousands of times. So, but I also appreciate everyone's perspective. To the comment about whether this, is this an appendix? Is this not an appendix? Basically, what we've done is moved the base code of R405 into this appendix. So it did exist in the original 2024 IECC. So rather than striking it all together, we picked it up and moved it into an appendix. So a little bit different from that, but also not totally different. So anyway, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Brendan?
Hey, sorry, I just wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts on the removal of this appendices. If anybody had any thoughts on how it affects affordable housing. Historically speaking, the greater the flexibility for affordable housing projects, better. Don't want to get into a situation where there's different projects where adaptive reuse, mixed use projects where I guess maybe the removal of these might make it a little bit harder in the affordability. And I guess having more options might be the best way forward for affordable housing. So I just want to see if anybody had any thoughts.
Brendan, you were coming in super softly, but so I just want to restate what you said to make sure that the board heard it. You're just wondering if anyone can speak to the impacts that this change or removal of this appendix might have on affordable housing in different types of mixed use affordable housing or general affordable housing projects. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Elizabeth, I see your hand, so I'll go to you.
Yeah, sure. I'll just chime in based on our what we know about affordable housing, because many of those thousands of models were for affordable housing. Affordable housing is not going to use this appendix. It will almost always be easier for them to comply either prescriptively or using the energy metric, because they do already have electrification goals based on Colorado Housing Finance Authority's QAP. So that's going to be the easier metric. So I don't think affordable housing would be affected by this decision. But it's a great question.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, Brendan. Okay. With that, and seeing no more hands, I think I'd like to move to a straw poll. So the first poll we'll do is asking the board if they would like to remove these two appendices. If we vote no we do not want to remove these appendices, we'll move to the second straw poll asking the board if they would like to accept Elizabeth's revisions to Appendix RM. So we'll start with this one. Please raise your hand as the voting mechanism. So raise your hand on Zoom. That's how you guys are going to vote. Does the board want to remove appendices RM and CL? Please raise your hand if you would like to vote for option A. Yes, to remove the appendices. Okay, I see 12 hands raised in support. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. Okay. If you would like to vote no, if you would not like to remove these appendices, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 6 hands, 7 hands for no. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. And then would any board members like to abstain from this vote? Andrew, your hand was raised for no. Is that correct? Okay, I think so.
Yes, it was.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so 0 abstentions. So that final vote is 12 board members voted in support of option A to remove these appendices, 7 voted in support of option B, no, to keep them, and 0 abstained. So that is a majority for yes, and we will move forward with removing these appendices from the base code. So with that, we will not need, or we do not have a need to vote on Elizabeth's proposal, but Elizabeth, thank you for reviewing those appendices and providing that those proposals. It's very was very helpful. Okay, cool. So with that, we're going to move on to the definitions section. So we had 3 different proposals to add new definitions to the code. The first is from Tim to add a level 2 charger definition. The second came from both Jess and Elizabeth to add a mixed fuel definition. And then the third is from Jess to add an all electric definition. So we'll talk about those per definition. And we will start with Tim. So Tim, I will pass it to you.
Thank you. I felt that it would be important to bring in a definition, as you see. I'm open for modifying that language to be better or more accurate, I guess. That was the best thing I could find. But since we've added in the body of the code on the tables where it talks about level 2, but it never really says what it is, definitions are very important in terms of enforceability. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, board comments, questions, thoughts, please raise your hand, and Adam, I'll go to you first.
I think the only thing I was going to say is, Tim, I agree with you that it's technically not a defined term. However, I would disagree that it is not outlined as to what a level 2 charger or level 2 type of space requires in all of the sections below the table. And I forget what the section number is, C40, C410, whatever, for the EV charging table requirements. All the sections below that explain exactly what those charging requirements are for level 2. And then below that, it explains what a level 1 charger space requires. And so while it's not a defined term, I would say that it is not, there is definitely clarity in the code as to what a level 2 versus a level 1 would require.
Just to add some clarification to Adam's comment, it's section C410.5.2.4. And it aligns with your definition, Tim.
Okay, I'll leave it up to the board. I just thought definitions, I've been a code person for a long time, and going back to a specific defined definition, that's a good term, is always helpful, but I'll leave it up to the board. I'm good.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, Ron.
I think Adam's absolutely right that it does state it there, but I also really find myself agreeing with Tim, even if it is a slight repetition. Very often people just want to go look it up, see what it is. They're not going to dig through the code to find it, and it's useful to have it all in one place.
Thanks, Ron. Adam?
Tim, in that case, then can I just propose, if you want to move forward with this, can I propose that you add to your proposal a request to add a level 1 charger definition as well? Because if you're going to define level 2, you should also define level 1. So can I ask, would you be amenable to doing that?
Absolutely. And I'm not withdrawing this. So
Sure, I know you were.
I want to go on the record for a vote, but I think that would be right in line with my thought of having a definition to kind of start where the scope starts. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to be clear, I was not necessarily saying I was opposed to a definition either. I just wanted to be clear that it was outlined what the requirements are, but if we're going to define level 2, we should also define level 1.
My recommendation would be to rework section C410 to remove kind of the defining points that we have that define a level 2 charger, and then just reference the definition so that we don't have the same thing in two places and risk some sort of mess up between the two at some point. So I'd recommend
that's a good solution. Yeah.
that we rework C410 and put the definitions in if that's the way you guys want to go.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So I am just going to say probably not feasible to accomplish in this meeting. So rather than us trying to figure out what those definitions look like right here, I think what we might do for this straw poll is vote instead on the intent stated to add a definition for level 1 and level 2 charger, clean up section 410.5.2.4 to remove the definition sort of language within those code sections and keep it and have the full definition reference be in the definition section.
I would also just note too that this is also going to affect residential because the same terms and the same requirements are in residential, so it would be addressed in both.
Yes, thanks, Adam. Tim, does that intention sound good to you as an intent to vote on?
Yes, now my scope of work just expanded. Thank you very much. No, that's a great. I will work something up and bring it back. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and please lean on our team for support in that as well. We're happy to help. Okay, any other comments, thoughts, questions from the board on this proposal? All right, I'm seeing no hands, so I'm going to just change level 2. I'm just going to change this quickly. Level 1 chargers and clean up.
Just say C410 and R409. Clean up C410 and R09.
Thank you. R409. And
you can say, yeah, clean.
If we understand that that is the intent, I will not make this question any longer. Any thoughts, any issues with the way that this question reads for the straw poll? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to change that to yes. So does the board want to add proposed definitions for level 1 and level 2 chargers and clean up section C410 and R409? A vote yes is to add those definitions and clean up the sections. A vote no is to not add the definitions and keep the sections as they are, and abstain is abstain. So board members who would like to vote yes on this proposal, option A, please raise your hand now. Okay. I've got 19 hands vote for yes. You guys can lower your hands. Thank you. All right. Any board members that would like to vote no on this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay. And any board members that would like to abstain? Okay. I see no hands. So that was a unanimous approval of this proposal or intent behind the proposal, which will be written out with the help of Tim and Anna and Adam. So thank you, everybody. All right, wonderful. So we'll move on to the next definition we've got today to look at, which is adding a definition for a mixed fuel building. And Jess, I know you were hoping to add a definition for mixed fuel and all electric. So if you want to speak to that broader intent when you pitch this, feel free to. So we'll go Jess and then we'll go Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, really the intention here is just to provide clarity for code users. And this was a recommendation from several folks in the public comment meeting. I did also propose a definition for all electric buildings because I just thought it was a little wonky when the code book said, you know, this is for mixed fuel and this is for all other buildings. And I thought to myself, well, what are all other buildings? I will note that the definitions proposed are for combustion equipment that is specific to space heating, surface water heating, and surface water heating. And there's no discussion here about cooktops. And so I'm not sure where those fit, as in, could you have, I think by definition, you could have an all electric building and still have a gas range. And so definitely open for feedback as to what folks think as to if you have a gas range, but you have electric water heating and space heating, where you think those buildings belong.
Thanks, Jess. And Will, before I have you jump in, I'm going to pass it to Elizabeth to share her proposal, but I'll have you up first for a discussion. So Elizabeth, I'll pull it over to you.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Jess said, 100% agree. The wording that I used here was exactly what we had written in R405 and R406. So I used that, and I totally agree with the idea of an additional definition of an all electric building. And I would just say an all electric building is one that is not a mixed fuel building. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, board comments, questions, thoughts here. Will, I'll pass it over to you since you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would just want to say that I believe that we should consider a building to be all electric for these purposes if they are not using combustion equipment for space heating and water heating. I do not think that we should have a requirement that they do not have a gas connection or that they don't have gas stoves. So that would be my sense. I think we should focus on the space and water heating.
Thanks, Will. Tim.
So how would this work with, and I think the comment just a little bit ago about a gas range. So you could have a gas line to a gas range and or a dryer, then that would not, you could have that with everything, your combustion equipment being all electric, and then it would not be classified a mixed fuel. I'm a little confused about how you could do both, have gas appliances. I'm sorry, that's a question. I'm confused.
It's a good question, Tim, as I think it's a bit of a wording, a question about wording. And Carolyn, I'm assuming you have a thought on this. So we will pass it to you and to also share whatever other thought you had.
Yeah, so I think it's important for us to separate out how this gets used and what our intent is. I don't believe we should call something an all electric building that has gas service to it. I think that that's inconsistent and incorrect, but I also agree with Will that when we're imposing requirements or requiring specific types of construction, our mandate is to focus on space and water heating. And so I think that the devil's in how the terms are used more so than what they're defined as. But I don't think we should call I don't think we can call it an all electric building if it's got gas appliances, combustion appliances in it. Even if, it's not our intent to require added considerations, like if it's just the stove that's gas. So I think to really respond to this, I think I need to go back and understand exactly where the mixed fuel or all electric triggers are and whether they actually exist. Because I thought we had narrowed down to just specific applications where we were triggering certain additional requirements, but I need to go back and look at that. Or maybe Elizabeth can comment on that.
Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say I can jump in here. So for all the electric preferred or the provisions that would require either fewer requirements for all electric or for all electric space heating and water heating, and then more requirements for non-electric space heating and water heating. Those are the only two things where those are implicated in terms of differentiating requirements. So for example, if we're talking about like R406 for the ERI path, if you have heat pump space heating and heat pump water heating, then you are considered in the all electric category for the score, the ERI targets that you have to hit. Cooking and water or cooking and clothes drying are not implicated. Same thing is true for R405, C4, C1, the prescriptive path under the commercial, and then C407 as well. So I think.
Yeah, and my question is like, where is the term building come into play? So when do we ever refer to a mixed fuel building or all electric building? And what does that cause to happen?
Yeah. Carolyn, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
I was just going to say, largely, we don't actually use those terms in the code. I think we use them in like some title headings and table headings, but largely in the code, it is actually referred to as a building that uses one or more fuel burning appliances for space heating or water heating. We essentially spell out what is being sort of proposed here to be included in the definition. So as of now, we don't really use these terms. And I think if we were to define these terms, for the most part.
Sorry, there are specific references to and we use the phrase mixed fuel buildings in C406 and C407.
Are they in actual like requirements? We call them mixed fuel buildings?
In titles.
In titles, yeah. It's the titles of the tables.
Right.
Mixed fuel buildings is the title, like, and that defines how many credits you have to have, what the savings you have to achieve.
Right.
So I will note that we don't use all electric building. I just did an entire search through the code. There's nowhere in the code where we're requiring an all electric building or giving a separate pathway for an all electric building.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is just all other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And noting that if a jurisdiction were to adopt the all electric reference or resource in the IACC, that there is already a definition of all electric building in that resource. Yes, so I don't know that we necessarily need to add one.
Good job.
Yeah. So based on that, I mean, I think I would be hesitant to define an all electric building as one that only has certain types of appliances. So I think I'd argue against that, acknowledging that we don't flow down any different provisions. We're dealing with predominantly electric appliances in a mixed fuel building in this scenario. So, yeah. Please,
that's a great point.
Create a new definition of something that's
a great point. I withdraw that suggestion. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks, guys. Ron, I'll go over to you.
I think these definitions have the potential to really muddy things a little bit. There's a lot of people out there, and with good reason, advocating for new construction that doesn't have any natural gas service, and this is primarily to avoid some of the problems with infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure that has methane leaks, and the fewer miles of these pipelines we have in our communities, the less methane is likely to leak from them. And I think that's not something I don't think that we've really addressed. So I think Will's comments about not including gas stoves make sense. It may be something we want to think about, but I don't think we've really addressed that from that perspective yet. And I worry if we have definitions that are sort of trying to address that, but our code isn't trying to address that, it just creates a little bit of a confusing situation. So I would argue that we, first and foremost, we need to be clear about what we're trying to do, and then have definitions and codes that support that. Personally, I think that there is some value with advocating for building new construction that doesn't have any gas service at all. I think there are benefits to that, but I don't think that's a conversation we've really had to date.
Thanks, Ron. John?
Yeah, this may not matter given some of the discussion that there may not be actually a benefit to calling something all electric, but I did want to give some context that I would probably be more, what we see in rural communities. We do have a community that has an all electric code in our county, and even with that all electric code, because it describes heating, people can go build an all electric home with heat pumps and then install a giant boiler to snow melt the driveway. And it's just kind of an absurd loophole that was created, or, a giant gas fireplace exterior that's just, burning all the time. And so, I kind of like the idea of a definition, but hearing this discussion, I'm a little, I guess, maybe confused. I need to give this some thought.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. Adam and then Elizabeth.
Well, I think also to Ron's point about, wanting to encourage construction of all electric buildings that don't have plumbing for natural gas, I just want to reiterate the point that there is a resource in the IECC that does exactly that. And the definition of all electric building in that resource defines it as a building that contains no combustion equipment or plumbing for combustion equipment. So I don't know that what we're talking about here is doing anything that the IECC hasn't already done in that resource. And again, because we don't actually use the term all electric building anywhere in the code, to Anna's point, I'm not sure what what would be defined here. You're defining a term that's not used, and there's no purpose in defining a term that's not used.
Thanks, Adam. And I just want to make sure that as the board is considering these two things, there's two distinct proposals that we're thinking about. One is to add a definition for mixed fuel. The next is to add a definition for all electric. And so be thinking about how your opinion on both of those. They're not a paired, they don't come in a pair as far as this proposal and voting. So Elizabeth and then Jess.
Sure, just to clarify the intent around the way that I wrote the definition, this is how we have the language for the different pathways for choosing your credits. I'll just also will add that if we're opening the door to saying that there's no plumbing for combustion equipment, that is a big can of worms that I think warrants a lot more discussion. The definition that I've proposed here is not a change to the current draft. It's just adding clarification, much like Tim's proposal. Whereas to remove plumbing is a big one. That's a big one. I think we'd want to sit on that for a bit.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jess? Jess, I don't think the unmute worked.
Thank you. I just wanted to say this is super helpful, and I really appreciate everyone's perspective on it. I was just flipping through the code book trying to find the particular table that I had looked at, and I am perfectly happy if we don't add a definition for all electric, and thank you for the reminder that it's in the resource. There is a table somewhere in our draft code that references mixed fuel buildings and all other buildings, and I just thought it was funny because I thought, well, if you're not a mixed fuel building, what are you? So that was really the intention, but I very much appreciate that it is defined in the resource, and so I thank you for that reminder.
Just to add some clarification around that, Jess, we are calling them all other buildings because we are right now under as an exception to a mixed fuel building. If you have heat pumps for space heating, you are allowed to use natural gas for backup heating during very cold events when your heat pump doesn't work.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. So, Jess and Elizabeth, you both proposed different definitions for mixed fuel. After hearing thoughts and discussion, are one of you feeling strongly about the definition you proposed to advocate for it? Otherwise, we'll vote for one or the other, or not to add it at all. Yeah, Elizabeth.
I can just chime in too. If we go with the first definition, we will need to revisit some things in our compliance pathways and some other language around limiting the use of providing plumbing for combustion equipment. Like right now, the way like C407, for example, it talks about how you define the building performance factors for things. The exceptions there also allow for a backup, like Anna just said, the supplementary heating to be gas. So we would have some issues some conflicts there that I think we need to review with each compliance path. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jess?
I'm happy to use Elizabeth's definition.
Okay, thanks, Jess. All righty, so with that, I am going to take us to the next slide. And rather than me make my computer go, oh yeah, Carolyn, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, so I think I was thinking the discussion was heading for a place of neither definition. I don't think I am comfortable with the definition that limits it to just space and water heating. A mixed fuel building is a building that has one or more utility services to it. Like it's we're somehow saying, I mean, I think I'm now really confused as to why we need to define mixed fuel.
Kim, maybe we could look at C406 and the way that reads, and C407 and the way that reads. I think it's 406.1.1.1. And then just some of the how that reads to bring it into context.
Elizabeth, can you see the code language? Just confirm.
Yeah.
So here's the C406.1.1.1.
And mostly just to bring this up for folks who are
You're moving too fast, Kim. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carolyn.
Anyway, this is why I proposed a definition, because it was unclear to me what's a mixed fuel building. So I tried to align it around this section, as well as the other section that has reference to mixed fuel, which is, sorry, C407 point something.
Yeah, and for clarity, I totally get how we apply it. Right, and I totally agree that we always require the points that we further clarify the other conditions that, in addition to it being a mixed fuel building, we then narrow and say it's, we are dealing specifically with space and water heating. My concern is creating a definition that's generally a term of art that's somehow narrowed and maybe in conflict with ways that might be used in other applications. And so that's where I take issue with now defining a mixed fuel building as something that's only using natural gas. So it can have a gas pool heater and gas cooking and gas fireplaces and or an industrial building with uses, and somehow it's not a mixed fuel building under that definition if the water in space is electric. And so I get very uncomfortable with that, and I still am at a loss as to why we need to define it based on how we're using it in code, because I think we just went through this whole thing of we have headers that say, look here if you're this, but we're not saying if you're a mixed fuel building broadly you have to do anything specifically. We're just pointing people. So I think we either need to be broader in the definition and consistent with how it might be used in other places, or not do it at all. That would be what I would advocate for.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Ron?
Yeah, I would agree with what Carolyn just said, especially given how these terms may be used by others around the country, especially when we if we start narrowing these definitions to exclude certain combinations. I'm thinking about, like, well, what about people who burn wood or propane, or are using natural gas for cooking? Like all these scenarios are not going to neatly fit, and we're going to create this narrow definitions that is particular to Colorado, that is at odds with how these terms are being widely used in the industries around the country. I think it could create a very uncomfortable situation.
Thanks, Ron. Kristen, did you want to add to those comments?
Oh, I think they said it very well. The only thing I would add is I do think I appreciate you pulling these up on the screen, because I think that it's very clear in the existing headers there, what these requirements shall apply to and which not. So I, upon discussion, don't feel further clarification is warranted. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Adam, anything to add?
I was just going to only emphasize that these terms also only appear in the headers. And so if the headers are somehow causing confusion, we can change the headers. But the actual requirements, as I think Kristen just noted, are very clearly spelled out. So if the headers are causing people confusion, either in the section headers or the table headers, happy to talk about that and change those if necessary. But I don't think defining the term will change any clarity about what the header is alluding to.
Maybe we should just make the headers more descriptive, say, buildings that are using multiple fuel sources, or, just make the headers a little bit more descriptive so that they're not confusing.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I totally appreciate everyone's points here. I think that it makes a lot of sense. My only goal here was for if someone looks at that table without any other context, how do they know if they are a mixed fuel building or not? So that's why I was proposing to add a definition. I see the consequences of that as well. So if there's a better way to do that, like Adam suggested, I'd be all for that as well. That's all I was looking for. Thanks.
Okay. So as we're thinking about options here, maybe one of the things we vote on is, rather than add a definition, to just find a better name for what we currently have in here as a mixed fuel building and change the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 references to that name in the code. Could be an option. Kim?
I really appreciate this discussion and would be in support of changing the headings to being more specific to combustion fuel heating appliances or whatever is more descriptive there. Because mixed fuel, it does take into account all kinds of other fuel that is commonly used, like wood. So thanks.
Maybe we could add another option here to just adjust those headers. That was all I was looking for, is an easy way for the community to understand what we meant by the differences in the tables without having to go hunt through the code. Because normally we would go look for a definition, like how do we define mixed fuel? So if we can remove the need for that, I think that would solve the problem without the unintended consequences.
Could someone throw out a proposed header name?
I mean, I think if we want to be really clear, using the language that's kind of in the section in the header might be the most clear.
Great.
So if you scroll up to like the last part of that last sentence in each of number 1 and number 2 on the screen there, if you use essentially those words in the header, then it's very clear that those are in alignment.
Isn't it just buildings that don't use electricity for space and water heating?
Right, essentially.
Okay. So does the board want to, does the board feel strongly about voting on the specific language that we are going to use to change the mixed fuel reference right now, if that does get approved in this initial straw poll? Or is the board okay with Anna, Adam, our team kind of taking that and doing our best to make that very clear?
A question for Carolyn. Do you see a way to adjust the definition of mixed fuel building that could remove some of those consequences that you noted, which I think, there's absolute merit there. And the only reason I say that is that putting in a definition would be a lot easier and easier to read. So if we could make that such that we don't have some of that that concern, do you see something in there that could be adjusted?
My answer is no, just because I think we still have to add the language and it just makes it even longer. Whereas I think just simply saying buildings that don't use just electricity for space and water heating will make it like really clear.
How about calling it mixed fuel for space and water heating? Something like that.
Yeah, so if you add those just take the word building off. Like I think it's the connection of mixed fuel and building that are the problem and not the application. So space and water heating mixed fuel, space and water heating electric only, like that could be a way to.
So if we, instead of saying mixed fuel building, if we say mixed fuel space and water heating, or building, say something like that. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, either one of those I think would solve that. Solve the problem.
It's always the connection to the building that is the issue I have.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So to just make sure we can continue to move past this, has been really great discussion. So the straw poll is as follows. Would the board like to add a definition for mixed fuel or change the code reference to mixed fuel? Just say buildings and buildings. And we'll do buildings. Okay, so option A is to add a definition for mixed fuel building. If the board agrees with option A, we will make sure we confirm the definition. B, would folks like to adjust the reference to mixed fuel buildings in the code? Some options named in the discussion are below. And sort of, if you guys are okay with it, I might shift that conversation offline and work with Adam and Anna to create that language and re-vet it with the board. If you would like to not change the code at all and just leave it as it reads, that would be option C. And then a vote for an abstain vote is option D. Does that look good to everybody? Any poll adjustments that need to be made before we vote? Okay. Board members in favor of option A, please raise your hand. Okay, option A, I see no votes. Thank you. Board members in favor of option B, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 18 hands for option B. You guys can lower your hands. Thank you. Board members who would like to make no changes and are voting for neither, please raise your hand. 0 votes for option C. Okay. And any board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 1 abstain. All right, thanks everyone. So that is the majority for option B. So we will take that offline, work on adjusting the 5 references for mixed fuel building in the code to simplify and hopefully clear that confusion up. And Jess, I just want to confirm in this discussion, it sounds like you were potentially withdrawing the proposal for adding an all-electric building definition. Does that sound correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Jess. So we will skip proposal 3, which brings us to our commercial proposals. So we have, I believe it's 8 proposals for the commercial section of the code. 1 for C402, 1 for C403, 2 for C407, 3 for C410, and then 1 for C503. So we'll go through those one at a time, and we'll get through as many as we have time for today. So Tim, yours is first, and I have your code language on the next slide. So if you want me to move to that while you share your rationale, I'm happy to do so.
Great. Yeah, if you could just go to the next slide, please. If that shows, yes, thank you. So my suggestion would be, I know the board voted, straw voted in the change to add what I struck out, rough framing and insulation inspection. And from an enforceability standpoint, that would be, I usually don't use the word impossible, but I will this time because of, especially on the commercial side, we get large buildings, whether it's a 4, 5, 6-story multifamily commercial building, and they are routinely doing rough framing inspections on the exterior walls as they move forward so that they can get sheathing on, whether it's structural frame, steel framing, fireproofing. There are so many different parts of that. And then we do lots of partial inspections throughout a whole project that requiring an air barrier and air sealing inspection at that time will be numerous partial and really increase the number of reports, inspections and reports that have to be turned in. So this really should just be falling upon that at the final inspection timeframe, which is what I always require right now. So that's my enforceability answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any questions, comments from the board? Brad.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Tim, for your comment. I do understand your concern with this. I just want to reiterate that the intent behind introducing this was to ensure that buildings that are going to be performing an air tightness test have contracted with or have an air tightness testing agency on board early on. I would be amendable to considering the removal of rough framing in here and consideration for just insulation inspection. And I'll just kind of lastly say this is something that we had put in our code at the request of the air tightness test agencies. If an air tightness test firm is brought into the building at final and is to perform an air tightness test, there's a higher likelihood that the air tightness test will fail rather than a firm that has been contracted with and has been consulting throughout the entire length of the project. That's the benefit to this. It's ensuring that those agencies or those firms are on board early on in the process. So if rough framing is the bigger concern here, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to consider removal of rough framing and just have insulation inspection.
Thanks, Brad. Tim, you want to reply to that?
Yeah, it's the same issue. We do partial inspections on these large buildings all the time. And it might be as soon as the building is effectively dried in for areas, and it might be two different towers or half of a tower, and the other half isn't dried in, and they will continue to be able to do their electrical and ductwork, et cetera, and start doing insulation once it's dried in with windows are covered up. So, I mean, I understand the concept on maybe a single family home. This isn't a commercial section. It is not enforceable. I don't see, and I respectfully, heard that you've had that in, and you're enforcing it on commercial. I'm not really sure how that works, but or how many reports you're getting on, say, a 5-story office building. I would suspect you're getting maybe a couple of hundred reports, and that's going to increase the cost. But so that's my comment to both.
Thanks, Tim. Kevin.
I guess the question I have, Tim, is a what if they get to that final inspection and everything's already covered up and it fails, then our ability to remedy has passed.
Can I just interject a little bit? So we've had a couple of times when we've had requirements like this where the sequence of construction interferes with the inspection process. And the way I've handled it is I've required the applicant to provide a letter from a responsible contractor who's going to be doing this sort of testing. So in this case, it would be the air sealing testing, and just a statement from them saying they're on the project, they're on board, they understand the requirements, they understand the target, and then let the project play out. And what we don't want is to get to the end of the project and discover we've completely missed the boat, and now retrofit is difficult, if not impossible. So the way I've dealt with that is just some statement indicating that there is somebody who's on board, paying attention, and is doing those necessary inspections along the way, and then leave it to them to figure out the details. That's how I've handled this sort of problem. I think Tim is absolutely right that in a project that is sequenced, there isn't any way to do the air barrier testing when parts of the project are still having open holes and other parts of the project maybe doing final paint. It's very difficult. So it does require paying attention along the way. And just evidence that's happening is enough for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do the same thing in effect that Ron just mentioned through the beginning. I require, since my staff, I don't have enough staff to do ongoing WRV inspections on a large project or even a medium or small size project. So I expect as a third party that they would have a consultant on board to be inspecting those, and then I get that report at the end. But I mean, I haven't seen one that didn't pass at the end, but trying to do an air barrier, like a blower door test in effect, like what Ron just pointed out, if you've got the west half of the building that you're trying to check that air barrier with the air test and the east side still all open, I'm not sure how that works. And I've got to figure out, I want to have a code that we can enforce. So that's just all my point. I mean, if this thing made it through and I adopt it next spring, I would, I can't make it less restrictive, but I would be changing this because I just could not enforce it in my jurisdiction. And I'll probably get in trouble from Adam for saying that.
Tim. Brad?
Yeah, I appreciate especially Ron's comment, and to address Tim's point, this wouldn't be any kind of a test occurring at this stage. So I would be amendable to working maybe even with some folks in kind of creating some language to Ron's point. And if Tim feels that would be something that would be more enforceable, instead of an air barrier and air sealing inspection report, some sort of a letter that the firm is engaged on board. And to Tim's point, yes, I did mention that we have this in place currently in the city of Fort Collins, and we have had to adapt a little bit because of the difficulty of that. So we do accept things such as a letter stating that the firm is consulting with and performing inspections at that point in the build process. So
Thanks, Brad. We'll do Elizabeth and then Dan.
I was just going to add that Denver does something similar. It's actually part of the permit process now, and recently added that they do require a letter signed by the owner or developer that says they've got somebody on board to do that work. And they also require that air barrier review at the time of permit. I think the goal of both of those, again, like you both said, is to make sure it doesn't get forgotten.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Dan?
Yeah, I would agree that some type of a letter seems more enforceable. I completely agree with Tim. We see in the Pikes Peak region all the time phase projects, phase TCOs, part of the building's not even there. So I don't know how you would possibly have an inspection report necessarily at a rough frame, since there are so many of those that can happen on a building.
Thanks, Dan. Anna?
I just wanted to clarify that this is in section C402.6.2.3. So sorry for all the numbers I'm about to spew at you, which says where section C402.6.2.1, which is the whole building test method, and C402.6.2.2, which is the dwelling and sleeping unit enclosure method, are not applicable. So this is for buildings that are not required to provide whole building testing. If that helps, Tim.
So then, to clarify, when does this section apply? on a say a 4-story office building?
So buildings that are between 10,000 and 50,000 square feet are permitted to use this section.
Okay, so I've got a 40,000 square foot, 3-story retail building that would have to comply.
That, yes, would have to comply with C402.6.2.3, which does not require testing.
So this section then would not apply to that size building.
No, this section, let me start
It
over.
would. Okay.
It would apply,
Okay.
and
So
they would
I
not
still
be
have this-
required to do testing.
I still have the same question no matter what size building, unless it's a little tiny. I mean, I get a lot of these small retail shell buildings that might be 8,000 square feet, and they don't have storefront going in for probably 6 months, because once they get the framing done and they get it all dried in, they start going crazy inside the building to build, and then they measure for storefront. Storefront right now with the supply chain is 4 to 6 months out. Every building I've ever seen. So I still have the same concern. I would be open for a suggestion of coming up with some language, and I would suggest that section C107 under inspections would be the place to maybe capture that, Brad. I'm open to doing some kind of clarification, whether it's a letter or just requiring a third party, something like that to help that.
Okay. So Anna, just to reaffirm that I'm understanding you correctly, to make sure that everybody is understanding. A building 10,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet, commercial building needs to comply with this, and there is no requirement for testing. It is only a requirement for an inspection. Okay. So just making sure that the board is fully aware of that. So I think what I'm hearing, Tim, is that you would perhaps be willing to change your proposal to, and maybe this is just something that we work on offline, to add language according to kind of what Ron and Brad were saying around having the building owner submit a letter saying we've got our third party on board to help manage their leakage pieces.
Yeah, I'm open for that. Maybe I can reach out separately and maybe ask for some help offline.
Okay.
Think of a way to do that.
That sounds good. Does the board, well,
But I'm sorry. So with that,
this point,
then I'd have to do something changing, still to strike out a rough frame and an insulation inspection, and then not have the final inspection, but to include some kind of, I guess, language shooting back to special inspection or something, I guess.
Ron, do you have language in your code right now that lends itself to that? What we're getting at?
It's not something that's in the code. But what I asked for is indication of who's going to be doing the work, that they understand the requirements, and that they understand the consequences for not achieving the requirements. Namely, they don't get a certificate of occupancy. So those are the three things. I want to know who's going to do it. I want to make sure they understand what the requirements are, and I want to make sure they understand the consequences for not achieving the requirements. And I make sure that is something that comes to me and the property owner. So it's not just the contractor doing this, but the property owner understands.
Okay, I'm just capturing that here. I know it's captured in notes, but just to help when we think about this code language and how we want to structure this. Okay. So Tim, for now, do you want to withdraw this proposal and work on some code language to bring back?
Yes, please. Thank you for all the input. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Okay, with that, I will move us to Brad's proposal for section C403. And Brad, I know that part of this proposal came from a flag that Anna and Hope had. So if you need us to chime in here, please just let us know. But over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think Hope just raised a point specifically that there were some provisions in maybe some other sections of code or other codes that did require paint material. So this was just providing some additional clarification, mainly specific to HVAC systems and typically the refrigerant lines. So it really just revolves around protection of those lines and the insulation material on those lines, and trying to move away from material that requires regular maintenance. So just adding one additional line of clarification that applied to HVAC system insulating materials. And from what I understand, the general consensus amongst the code professionals was that this might have solved for that. Would welcome any comment from Anna or any others.
Thanks, Brad. Adam or Anna, I know Hope's not here. Do you guys want to add anything?
I think Brad summarized it. It's just a clarification to the section to make sure that we aren't unknowingly including any adhesive tape or paint products used elsewhere in the building.
Okay, thanks, guys. Any comments or questions from the board on the proposal? Kristen?
I do assume this would exclude like a spray foam used to fill any kind of penetrations through the envelope or whatnot.
Yes, this would just be applied to HVAC system insulating materials. So any sort of spray foam that's used, yeah, wouldn't be included.
Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we can move to the poll on this one. So does the board want to amend section C403.13.3.1 as proposed? Option A is yes, move forward with the amendment. Option B is no, do not. And option C is abstain. Board members in favor of option A, please raise your hand. Okay, I've got 16 hands for option A. You guys can lower your hands. Thank you. Board members in favor of option B, not amending this section, please raise your hand. Okay, I see two votes no on this proposal. And any board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 abstentions. So this proposal wins majority and we will include this amendment. So I just want to name it as 11:45. We've done an amazing job so far today. I think we'll have time for 1 or 2 more proposals and then we'll start wrapping up things around 11:57 or so. We don't have too much wrap up, so we should be able to be pretty quick with that. So the next proposal comes for C407 is from Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, these are tiny and quick. This is just kind of tidying up some words, making the name of the method align with the standard and adding a year to the version of ASHRAE for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Comments, questions from the board? Adam.
The only thing I just want to note, Elizabeth, is in chapter 6, the ASHRAE year standard year is already included as part of the reference. It specifies that any 90.1 references are 90.1 2022. So I don't know if that solves your concern there. Because I remember Hope had concerns about including it actually in the code language on a previous time we had brought this up. And I just wanted to note that in chapter 6, it already clarifies that it is to the 2022 version of the standard. So do with that what you will, but I just wanted to point that out.
We actually hunted for it and didn't find it. So it's very possible I just missed it. Is there any harm in adding it here? And maybe that's a question for Hope.
Yeah, Hope's not on, but Anna, I don't know if you had any thoughts about any harm on including it here, but
Not that I know of, but Hope is gonna know like
Yeah,
the reference.
this is
thing.
so minor. It doesn't change the intent. I'd be happy to table this or withdraw it and just, consider it at run it by Hope, see what she thinks.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, let's table this, and then when we connect with Hope next, we can ask her if there are any potential conflicts, Adam, if that sounds like the right next step.
Well, and I think we can still vote on the total to simulated. That I don't think is a problem to vote on that today, but the 2022 might be.
Okay. So why don't I just go ahead and take this part out. We can vote.
That should say 9. It
Okay,
should say
wait a
9.
second. I don't think that was. Okay, and then we can double check with Hope that won't be a problem. And we can still vote on this small change here. Any other comments or questions from board members for this proposal? Not seeing any hands. We'll just go ahead and move to the vote. So board members in favor of this amendment, option A, please vote yes, option A. Board members not in favor, option B, so on and so forth. So board members in favor, please raise your hand. Option A. Okay, I have 16 hands raised for option A. You guys can lower. Thank you so much. Board members against this proposal voting option no, please, or option B, no, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 0 votes for option B. Board members who would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. I had one abstention, so this proposal passes with a majority. All right, Elizabeth, back over to you. And again, I have your code language on the next 2 slides, so when you want me to move there, just let me know.
Yeah, sure. So this is just a suggestion for simplification and at least one error correction. If let's see, I don't know if you happen to have the code version open. This is the section that relates to the amount of renewable energy that is allowed to be claimed under the performance path. In the attempt to align this with C406, a big old table was added that honestly just makes it really complicated to try to calculate how much renewable energy is permitted. So my suggestion here is to just revert that formula to standard ASHRAE 90.1 protocol, which simplifies it to 5%.
Can I explain about this a little bit?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So within section C406, we have a whole table with the allowed number of credits we are allowed to receive. We used allowed too many times, but the number of credits we are allowed to receive from using renewable energy on site. Using the, I think it was NBI, somebody told us that 0.1, each credit is worth 0.1% site energy intensity reduction. Using that, we got to these percentages, and I just want to note that no building occupancy types within any climate zone are allowed to count 5%, a 5% reduction in site energy intensity reduction through renewables, which is what ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G allows now. The highest percentage is 4.3%, and that is a school in climate zone 4B. The lowest percent is like group R2 at 0.5% site energy intensity reduction. So I'm not speaking for or against. I just want to explain the rationale behind it and the differences between C406 and C407.
And I'll add, I would be totally open to adjusting the percentage allowed, just trying to simplify that when people are trying to look at it and calculate it. It gets complicated.
Thank you, guys. So I'll let everyone sit with this for a minute. I just want to show this is where that point or that 5% is coming into the equation here. Questions, comments, thoughts from the board? Carolyn.
I think that internal consistency discussion that I think just happened, I need to sit on a little bit and fully understand the difference between 406 and 407 in this regard. Is there anything that can better support our sitting on it? Because you described something and I'm not 100% sure I followed and I just need to reflect on it.
Sure. So Kim, can you pull up table? I can tell you, I can click over to it. Sorry, I have too many windows.
In our code or in the IECC?
In our code.
Yes.
The renewable table.
Is it C406?
Yes, it is. I feel like it's a race to find it. Here it is.
Keep going down, Kim.
Almost there. I can't be there.
There you go, right there.
So these are the number of credits that projects that are complying with C406 are permitted to gain using renewable energy. And from discussions that we have had with the companies and government entities that were involved in creation of C406 for the 2024 IECC, they informed us that each credit is estimated to reduce site energy use intensity by 0.1%. So using that math, we turned these credits into site energy intensity percentage reductions allowed in section C407. So because C407 is now based off of site energy use intensity savings, we can calculate, for a group R2 building in climate zone 4B, 22 credits is now a 2.2% site energy intensity reduction, which allows a BPF adjustment of 0.022. It's horrible. I agree with Elizabeth. It's terrible. It's so confusing. But because these credits are so variable across the different climate zones and across the different occupancies, there isn't a very nice, concise way to say 5% or 4% to maintain the mandate of consistency from C406 to C407. So if creating a code that is easier to understand and easier to use in this instance is the code board's goal, then we can come up with some sort of percentage for that equation that Elizabeth showed. But yeah, does that help, Carolyn?
It does, and I think I'm working in my head through like the potential consequence. I think if we go with Elizabeth's methodology, we probably need to lower the percent to be more consistent with like what would have been an average or something a little bit more aligned. Like I don't want to overly credit solar under 407 when it's not credited that way in 406, even if we don't try and produce the exact same complex table.
Yeah, I'd be open to that.
I wonder if the solution is then moving towards back to the simple equation that Elizabeth had proposed, and then Anna, like if the board approves it, we could go back and determine an average percentage that would be appropriate.
Within
Elizabeth, does
406, you mean, Adam? If we approve the change in C407, then we would go back and make the change in C406. Is that what you're saying?
not C406. We would change the percentage in C407. It wouldn't be 5%.
Use 406 to better calculate the percentage in 407 that we would apply to the simple equation.
Right. Yeah. So I think Elizabeth, if you're comfortable with that, then we could vote on that.
I am comfortable with that.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I just want to raise can we remove the C's? It should be PI because we're not doing cost anymore. So it should be PI plus is less than
thank you. You are
PIT.
correct. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Kim, you don't necessarily need, I was gonna say, we'll fix it in the code, so.
Okay, thank you for not making me do that right now. I'm not sure I was following that one. So what it sounds like is we want to vote on the intent to simplify this section and revisit this 0.5 or this 5% number here to better align with, oh gosh, that's not the right highlight.
Yeah, and when you're looking at this, can you all look at this to see if it should be a different number per climate zone, or just one number in your analysis? That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to add, this will be a lot easier also for jurisdiction code reviewers to make sure things are actually in compliance, because it's a complex calculation as it is, and this definitely will simplify that on your end.
Okay. And so my understanding is if the board votes to approve this change, or the intention behind this change today, we will take this offline, figure out what that percentage point should be, and if it should be dictated by climate zone or not, and bring it back to the board for approval. Is that correct? Adam, is that my understanding of what we're suggesting here?
Well, I guess I'd ask Elizabeth because I think what we're doing is we're going to figure out what the average appropriate based on C406 number should be. So I don't know that if the board approves that that's the methodology that we would use to calculate that number, then I would leave it up to all of you as to whether or not you want to revote on that number being right, or if you want to just accept that that is what the average would be.
Okay, understood.
I would be happy to revise my the wording here to make that 0.05 reflective of an average intent over C406. But again, just trying to simplify it. I suppose my proposal is to remove the table and pick one number that is reflective of the C406 intent.
Okay. So making sure that all of our board members feel comfortable with this. Any questions about what we will be voting on today? And I might just say amend section C407 to remove table and add average RE contributions in line with C406. Does that?
In line with ASHRAE 90.1.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, no,
sort of. I think we need a reference with C406 credits. Sorry, which C406 credit is that?
Just credit R01. You can call it that.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. So I recognize there are 2 minutes left. So if board members are not feeling comfortable with this at this moment, I would ask that you vote abstain, and we can revisit this at the start of the next meeting. If board members are feeling confident in the conversation and the direction that they're feeling, then we will, vote one way or the other. So option A vote is yes, amend this section in C407 to remove the table and add an average allowable renewable energy contribution in line with ASHRAE and C406 R01. Option B is no, do not change what we have in there. And then option C is abstain. Okay, so board members in favor of option A, please raise your hand. Okay, I see. Won't give up yet. Okay, I saw 14 hands total in support of option A. Thank you, guys. If a board member does not approve this amendment or change, please raise your hand and vote for option B now. Please raise your hand. 0 votes for option B. Okay. Option C, if any board members would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay. I have 4 abstentions. So the majority is still to approve this amendment. And so we'll trust our code team to take that offline and continue to work on that. It's noon, so we're going to scroll all the way back down to our wrap up and next steps here. I will make this very, very quick. Our next meeting is next Thursday, March 6th. It's another 3-hour meeting. The focus will be finishing the commercial proposals and beginning the residential proposal discussion. So please let that be the focus of your review and prep for the next meeting. If you brought forward a discussion item, or if any board member has a change in proposal or a new proposal from the discussions that we had today, I need those proposals by 8 a.m. on Monday at the very latest, so that I can get those back to board members to review before we move forward with discussion on those. So again, if you don't plan to change or add any new proposals, that is okay. But if you do, I need that language by Monday. And then we'll send out the notes from this meeting to approve at our next meeting. So I think that's everything. Thank you guys for the wonderful discussion today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Have a good one.
Hope
Thanks.
everyone have a great